Thank you very much. My name is Jacob Rugare Mugumbate, and I'm from Zimbabwe. I'm going to talk about Africa Driven Epilepsy Research, and this topic fits very well into what has been presented by Professor Lisk from Sierra Leone, and also Dr. Masi from Cameroon. Indeed, research is very important for Africa, especially in the field of epilepsy that we are all involved in. But what is Africa-driven research? So first, the outline of my presentation before I talk about what Africa-driven epilepsy research is. I'll just give you a summary of what I'm going to talk about. I will define it. I'll also raise some questions about African research. I also provide you a summary of a short research that I did, provide a summary of the findings, recommendations, and suggestions. So I will try to use simplified languages, seeing that we've got a mixed audience, and I've got no interest to declare. So what is Africa-driven research? It's indeed a very broad topic in the social sciences, but also in the hard sciences. We know that a lot of research happens in Africa, but not all of the research is Africa-driven. So when it is Africa-driven, it has to be initiated by Africa. It should include African institutions, governments, universities, organizations, institutes, publishers, as well as regional institutions. The problem should be conceptualized and defined from an African perspective, and African researchers should play a part in that. For it to be African-driven research, the methods, the ethics, the theories should also resonate and be appropriate to the African situation. It is also important that results be made accessible to African communities, students, policymakers, workers, and professionals. And this is something that the previous presenter talked about. We need to have research that reaches or that is helpful to the communities that we work with. That's very important. So I said earlier that there's a lot of research happening in Africa in several fields. This is also the same in the area of epilepsy. There's a lot of research that is happening, but there are some questions in terms of that research. Who's doing this research? Who owns or funds the research? Who benefits from this research? How? In short, who drives this research? And they are driving it going where? And as Africans, where do we sit? Are we in the driving seat? Are we passengers? Are we in the back seat? Are we in the trailer, or are we on top of the car carrier? We need to be asking all these critical questions about research in Africa. So to understand some of these questions in this short research, I didn't try to understand all the questions, but some of the questions that I posed in the previous slide. I did an analysis of epilepsy research that focuses on Africa. I could not find an African database that indexes more research on epilepsy, so I used Google Scholar. As you can see on the slide, there is a picture from Google Scholar. But what did I focus on in Google Scholar? Seeing that Google Scholar is a very huge database. So I applied two search terms, epilepsy and Africa, in Google Scholar, and I looked for articles that were deposited in this repository between June 2019 and June 2020, which is just a year. I sorted the articles by date. You can do this automatically in Google Scholar. And I included articles that talked about epilepsy in Africa. That's according to the two search terms. And what did I find? There were a total of 98 articles. These articles were manually screened by author, by topic, and also by research population to ensure that they were Africa focused. 22 were excluded because there were repetitions and some of them were irrelevant. At the end, 76 articles or publications met the inclusion criteria, and these were reviewed. The review came up with some findings, and this is just an overview of the findings. Most of the research was published in Europe, in India, and the USA. And I'll give you the figures, most was published online, which is quite an opportunity. Universities or professional associations were involved in some of the publications, and the big international and commercial publishers were also involved, and many publications were from conferences. Now, in terms of the specific figures, I'll start by showing you the number of publications by country, how they were distributed, the 76 publications that were included in this review. In terms of Africa, most were from South Africa and Nigeria, with 17 and 18 each. There were some, 2, Uganda, Kenya, Egypt, and Cameroon, and also 1 from the other 6 countries. This shows us that epilepsy research is limited. These are only a few African countries shown, and their research is concentrated in 2 countries. Reviewing or analyzing just 100 articles in Google Scholar might not be very strong, but in terms of scoping, it gives us an understanding of what exists in terms of epilepsy research. I'm sure even in PubMed, we should be able to get figures that show us where epilepsy research is concentrated in Africa. The other finding is to do with publications according to where the publication was, the publishing was done. So you see in this donut chart that only about 18% were published in Africa. That's an important area for us researchers to look into. For example, why we've got, as the light, why we've got only 18% out of all the 76 articles reviewed are published outside Africa. Some will see this as an opportunity, but it's an area that we need to look at critically. Then here, I've also did an analysis according to the number of publications published in African countries versus those published outside. And the results here are showing that, for example, South Africa, almost half of the publications in South Africa were published from outside. And when you look at Nigeria, almost all the publications, those ones that you see in blue, they were done outside of Nigeria and actually outside of Africa. And the situation is the same in all the other countries. Actually, some of the countries with 1 or 2 publications, they don't have publications that happened in their country. So that's also an important thing for us researchers to look at. But when you look at number of publications by authors, you find that about 66% were African authors. That's something that we should smile about because it's very positive. But when you think about where this research was published, then you also it also becomes important for you to think about this positive thing in light of the other things that we have seen that were not so favorable for Africa. So what are my recommendations based on this small study of African researches available in Google Scholar? I think there is need for governments and African institutions to fund research. That's very important. There's also need to initiate African conferences. You saw from my presentation that some of the articles that were in Google Scholar were articles that came out of presentations done at conferences. So there is need for us to work on increasing conferences in Africa and publishing from those conferences. Then there's also need to publish in institutional repositories of African universities. From the articles that I reviewed and those that came from South Africa, some articles were published in university repositories. For example, the OpenUCT at the University of Cape Town. It had a good number of articles that they published. Then it's also important to use African journal hosts, databases, and indexing sites so that our research becomes accessible. The African Journals Online is an important aggregator of published work, as well as the African Social Work Network. There are many other ones. It is also important to build the interest of students in epilepsy research, those who are doing honors, masters, and PhDs. If they do research on epilepsy, it is likely that they will be involved in epilepsy at the level we are involved now. And it is also likely that they will be interested in working in the area of epilepsy. My own interest in epilepsy started with an honors project that looked at marital status of people with epilepsy in Zimbabwe. And I then continued working in the area of epilepsy. So it's important that we start to work with students early on. I'm glad that in Rwanda, for example, they are already working with universities, and that's an important starting point. Specific recommendations for the Epilepsy Alliance Africa: it's important to start an online repository. It doesn't cost you anything. We've got a website, we can put publications online. It's also important to work with universities, and I've already mentioned this. It is also important to form a research committee, task force, or network, and I'm glad, Professor Najib, you just suggested this, and I think it's something that we should take on. Then it's also important that we publish in African publications, including AMIJ. AMIJ, that's the African and Middle East Epilepsy Journal. So it's important that we consider publications that are local. Then further suggestions for African researchers. We need to participate in and support African research, and we need not to prioritize research from outside, especially led by institutions or people from outside. I'm not suggesting that we don't work with them, but I'm saying we do not have to prioritize it at the expense of African research, because African research has got advantages because we conceptualize the problems, and we're also researching from an African perspective. Then I've also read about ethics dumping, which is a process whereby people coming from outside prefer to do research in Africa because they think ethics committees in Africa are not very rigorous, or you don't pay very much for the ethics committee, so it becomes cheaper to do research in Africa. So we also need to be mindful of that. While research done by people from outside can be beneficial, it can also come at a cost. So those are important issues that we need to be aware of. So in conclusion, I would like to say that Africa-driven research is research that is conceptualized and initiated by Africa and includes our African institutions and researchers. But for this to happen, research funding must be available. African publishing, indexing, and database options must also increase. As the Epilepsy Alliance Africa, we have a role to play in improving research production, dissemination, as well as knowledge translation. Ndatenda siyabonga zikomo. Shukran, merci, that's thank you everyone. I would be happy to hear in the chat forum how you say thank you in your own language so that I include this next time. Thank you for listening. Over to you, Professor Najib.
Thank you, Professor Jacob Rugare from Zimbabwe. Very nice presentation. I think you gave a very nice picture about the research in Africa and all the trends and difficulties faced in Africa. I think we can get 2 or 3 questions. Maybe I will start with the first one. So in your results, I think you focused maybe on, I don't know if you did it for the English-speaking countries, because I didn't see any productivity from North Africa. Because I can share with you one study that has been published recently. I think you can see it, and They did very nice presentation about oil productivity in all the continent. And I think, of course, they found that Egypt is the first one, followed by South Africa, then Morocco and Tunisia are in the third place. This was concerning all new science research since the 20 last year. I don't know if maybe you just focus on English papers or maybe research in general.
Thank you very much. I focused on research in general, but like I said earlier, the research was limited to articles deposited in Google Scholar in the last 365 days, which is just 1 year. So there was a limitation in that research, but it is important to expand it and look at publications in other databases, as well as other researches that analyzed African research on epilepsy before, like the one you just mentioned.
Okay, thank you. But as you mentioned, I think there is a lot of efforts to be done. And also, we found it in the presentation of Dr. Gams before. The conferences and also the papers are really very scarce, and very few papers are published. And I think when you discuss with colleagues in Europe, in North America, in Asia, so the first thing to do is the search on PubMed. So when they search by names or by country, they find very few publications, and they don't respect us as we need. And I think Africa is a huge continent with more than 1.2 billion inhabitants and around 53 countries, a lot of cultures, a lot of resources, a lot of course, very few physicians, researchers, but I think with collaboration with multicentric studies, I think we can do a lot of things. And my hope is to finish with one representative per country. And I think now we have also another French speaking, which is AfriStaff meeting. And I think we have many colleagues in both groups. So I think we could succeed in having contacts in every country and maybe share a lot of questionnaires, a lot of studies to be done. Thank you very much. I don't know if you have any other questions. Kazadi and will discuss about the plants research concerning some medical plants. I don't know what you can say, Dr. Jacob.
Please come again. What was the question, Professor Najib?
About plant research, the use of plants in neuroscience and epilepsy.
Oh, yes. My view is that more research is needed in that area. And there's also need to bring people together. Some of the plans might not be known to people, and it's hard to begin research if you don't know them. So it's important to involve community stakeholders in research of that nature. But I think there are opportunities there. We have seen that with marijuana. There are opportunities there, but only more research is required to ensure that people understand what are the benefits and the risks of using certain plants. Yeah,
I fully agree with you about marijuana because we did the research recently in Morocco. I don't know if you know that Morocco is the first producer in the world of marijuana with 23% of all the world production, followed by Afghanistan, then Turkey, Lebanon, and other countries. So I think we have a treasure, I can say, North Morocco. Now we heard a lot of publications about West syndrome, Ohtahara syndrome, and Dravet syndrome, responding very well to CBD, cannabidiol, which is a derivative from cannabis. And I think we should work on this product. I think we can also maybe, if Morocco could start producing some medications using cannabis, I think it could be very cheap for Africa to be exported from Morocco to Africans than to go to Europe, than to come back to Africa with a much higher price.